Good afternoon, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm briefly going to introduce the four speakers, the four conversationalists of this afternoon. On my left side, your right side is Liu Jie. He is the founder of the Long March Space in Beijing, artist, curator and gallerist. Next to him is Stefano Baia Curioni, associate professor at Bocconi University. And here is Marcio Botner, artist, curator and gallerist as well of a Gentil Carioca in Rio de Janeiro. So we are going to talk about the art market, and my name is, by the way, Olav Velthuis. I am an associate professor at the University of Amsterdam. I have been researching art markets for quite a while, and one of the reasons why we made this, put together this conversation was on the occasion of a book that Stefano and I just published. It's called Cosmopolitan Canvases. This is not supposed to be a real book presentation, so I will wave with it once and that's it. But what we will be talking about, the myth of a globalized art market, is very much coming from this book. Now, all four of us are going to give short introductions. I will be starting, Stefano will be next, and then it's up to you who's following. What the talk will be about is this, and I apply it to Art Basel. Basically, the message and what I would like to discuss with you, with all of us this afternoon is, in the 45 years that Art Basel now exists, the world has completely changed. The art world has completely changed. It has become much more globalized than it used to be. The art market has completely changed, but Art Basel has by and large remained the same. Now you could see this as a marketing slogan, but it isn't. What I want to say with that, Art Basel has remained the same, is this. When you look at the countries that the galleries at Art Basel are coming from, basically nothing or not much has really changed. It is, and it used to be, dominated by 4 countries only. And those 4 countries are the United States, Germany, Switzerland, and the UK. I made a graph that I'm not going to show, but I can easily show you because it's a very simple graph. If you look at the percentage of these 4 countries and the extent to which they dominate all the galleries present at Art Basel, it is a flat line. It was, in the early 70s, about 60 to 70%, and it still is. So in spite of the fact that we think that we live in a globalized art market, these 4 countries, the big 4, continue to dominate Art Basel. And what I would like to talk with you about is that a problem? Is it really true? And why? Why is that the case? Now, Basel is not completely unique there. In spite of all this talk, and probably you're familiar with this, like this, all this talk about the art world turning into a global village, or, you know, at places like this, it seems like you run into the same people all the time. Galleries talking about collectors that they meet all over the world, at art fairs all over the world. In fact, what we find in our book is that it is dominated by a very small group of countries. And a lot of art worlds and art markets continue to be organized very locally. So if you would look or walk into a random gallery, let's say in New York, or in London, or in Berlin, or in Amsterdam, or in Beijing, or in Rio, it is very likely that you're going to find local artists. And sales of those local artists continue to be dominated by local collectors. So that is one message that I would like to discuss. To what extent is the art market really global, or to what extent does it continue to be locally organized. Now, it's surprising here at Art Basel that these 4 countries, the UK, the United States, Switzerland, and Germany, that they continue to dominate. And why is it surprising? Well, because in the meantime, as I said, the world has changed. The art world has changed. In countries like China or Brazil or Russia or India, in 25 years, in the last 25 years, art markets and art worlds have developed rapidly. But you don't see much of that represented here. Of course, there are some galleries from China and Brazil, and the number is steadily increasing, but only very, very, very slowly. So you don't really see the maturity of art worlds in these countries. You don't really see much of that here in Basel. The art worlds have professionalized in the last 10, 20 years. But again, you don't see it represented here. And to me, it's also peculiar if you just think of it from a business point of view. These are art worlds and art markets in countries like Brazil and China that are very rich and also economically rich. There are many new collectors in these countries. So again, the question is why are not more galleries admitted to Art Basel? They could bring new collectors to the scene. But it's happening only very, very gradually. Just one comment before I would pass it on to Stefano. The question is it a problem? Is it a problem that here at Basel you find these 4 countries so dominant and the rest of the world? Well, European countries and the United States are very well represented, but basically all the rest of the world is still extremely marginalized. I've seen one gallery from Africa. I've seen a handful from China. I've seen a little bit more than a handful from Latin America, but not much more than that. Is it a problem? Yes, I think it is a problem, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we live in a globalized world. The rest of our lives are completely globalized, so it would be great if we would get a better access at places like Art Basel to art that is created in these countries. I think it is an issue for those countries themselves, because getting access to Art Basel is also a way to develop the markets further. It's a source of legitimation. It's how galleries can build up a reputation by getting access to Art Basel. So I think there are several reasons to be concerned about it and to really ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why is it the case that in this extremely globalized world that we live in, 4 countries, the big 4, continue to dominate Art Basel?
Just to react to your introduction, of course, looking at the segmentation and the differentiation of the art worlds and the concentration of powers in Basel, we were struck by the idea that there was a kind of inefficiency from the market point of view. So if you think about Basel as a market, it could be inefficient, this kind of concentration. This is implicit in what Olav was saying. Then I thought that maybe the metaphor of the market is a wrong one. Maybe Basel is not really a market, even if it appears like a market. So, and if you think what a fair is, what a fair was or used to be, if we look at the fairs in Europe, the first fairs were in the 13th centuries, and there were fairs, private fairs of merchants that were trading money in a time in which money was something that still need to be defined as a good with its properties. So they were trading money and they were developing fairs. And those fairs were selective, first of all, were effective. So not everybody was admitted. They were admitted only few bankers, the real one, the one that were bridging the good money, because the bad money, throw away the good money. So they need to have good bankers there. So they only hired good bankers. They were trading money effectively. and they were self-representing themselves. So in a sense, it was an engine for the definition of a good, the money in that case, and an engine for the self-definition of that category of private operator. They were developing a new world. So I thought maybe the metaphor of a market is wrong for Basel. Basel is a moment of order, is a moment in which the self-representation of what is implicit in the art system comes out and fix the hierarchy. So this is why it doesn't change, because changes are very slow. So maybe we don't perceive. Maybe you have resilience inside, whose meaning is exactly the fact that the system need to be reproduced in a stable way, because nobody exactly know what art is. So the system need to fix it, as the ancient bankers need to fix what money is at that time in a pre-capitalistic world. So the question is, why should this power system change? Probably it shouldn't, or maybe it doesn't need, or maybe the economic pressure is not strong enough to push them in the direction of change. The second question that I ask myself is why, or which are the consequences of the symbolic meaning of Basel in the overall art practices and art system? This is, to my point, an even more urgent question, because maybe Basel could be a little bit inefficient. But the point is that this word, this way of doing, this way of representing a self-representing art has a huge symbolic impact on the system. So this stability, this lack of change, influences the way in which symbolically the art will represent itself. And this is even another cultural layer which is, let's say, hidden behind the stability you're mentioning, and probably behind this metaphor of market that we should destroy a little bit. Who wants to say something?
Hello, good afternoon.
Ciao.
Only to bring one thing to my short biography. Art is founder of Gentil, Carioca, now also the CEO of a social organization that take care of the School of Visual Arts of Ocalage in Rio and Casa França, Brazil. And I think this is important also to bring different points of view about the market. No? I would like to quickly bring a little bit of the history the last years in Brazil to contextualize a little bit how we need to grow inside to be global. No? And of course, after I'm going to bring specific points to discuss about the Basel, and not only Basel, but Basel Miami, Basel Hong Kong, and we begin to open this talk. No, let's go back. I'm going to read something quickly. Let's go back to 1951, moment that was created the São Paulo Biennial, the second oldest biennial in the world after Venice. And at that moment, Max Bill, the amazing Swiss artist, architect, designers, was shown for the first time in Brazil, this 1951. And he was immediately opened the door for the concretism, a new concretism that will come in the 50s and 60s. Since that moment, the roots of the Brazilian visual art, you see a clear, strong evolution line until the recent production of artists. From 51, with the São Paulo Biennial, begins to come museums. MASP, MAM Rio, MAM São Paulo, Pinacoteca, MAR nowadays in Rio, MAC, Museum of Contemporary Art. So you have these museums. In 1975 was created the School of Visual Arts of Ocalage, responsible to bring to the scene important Brazilian artists like Beatriz Milhazes, Ernesto Neto. In the 80s, the market really began to grow with Marco Antonio Vilas, an amazing, galleries, with Luisa Strina. So these several galleries began to start to grow in 2000. That's the moment we began to grow, began to have an association of galleries This also, we are talking about 7 years ago. The collectors began to be a part of important boards like Pompidou, Guggenheim, New Museum. The Brazilian artists began in the last 10 years to be part at important museums like Cildo Meirelles at Tate, Beatriz Milhares at Baylor Foundation, Ernesto Neto at Guggenheim Bilbao, Palais de Tokyo, Lygia Clark at MoMA. So I think it's important to understand quickly this view. But in the same time, we talking about globalization, we need to talk about inside the country and outside the country. Talking about inside, we have in Brazil a crazy high tax. And this talk a lot about what is globalization. So if you buy a piece abroad and wants to bring inside Brazil to legalize the piece and to put in your collection, you need to pay 60% of the real value. So this is something that shows how it's difficult to grow an international collection in Brazil. Even the collectors are more and more international, and we have several here in Basel, and for sure buying good pieces for the collection. But sometimes they need to live abroad, or they need to pay these crazy taxes. So it's something that also we need to talk. No? What they did is that during the art fairs in Rio and São Paulo, they have an agreement with the state. So this brings the taxes to 40%. Even this still is something totally absurd. Here is 8% for you to have an idea. No? Now, coming to Basel, you are the expertise. You two, we are here, no? As guys that makes the things happen. But we have around 300 galleries. And as you are talking, we have more or less, 75 to US, more or less 55 from German and Swiss. I remember that for years participating at the moment with Gentil Carioca statement, and we are the only one from Latin America between 28. And I remember that I used to come to my colleagues, my friends, galleries, of course, and talk with them about why not 2 Latin American galleries, only 1. And so even if you go now, and I totally agree, probably you have in the fair here, we are talking about 12 Latin American galleries between 300. Okay, you are going to say, is this a globalization? Is this a protection field? We are talking about, in the same time, for sure, thinking about market globalization, someone is going to answer, but that is totally normal. If you go to Miami, Basel, Miami, we are talking about between 250 galleries. We are going to talk about from 16 to 20% of Latin American galleries. So we grow to 40, 50 Latin American galleries. Oh, that's normal. You have the Basel, Miami, you are talking about American market, you are talking about Latin American also. Makes sense that you have this quantity there and not here. Does this really make sense? It's something that we can talk. And of course, if you go to Hong Kong, it's going to be, we are going to bring probably the same kind of drawings. If you go to the committees of the fair, and I have a pleasure to be part of the Miami, Basel Miami committee with my colleagues, and I learn a lot and we talk a lot. But of course, you have 2 Latin American galleries or expertise is inside of the board. But if you come to the committee of Basel, you don't have any Latin American galleries as expertise, because we are talking about the power of Europe, the power, of course, of German, Swiss, in the case of Basel, to bring a direction about the art in Europe. And of course, when we talk about Europe, we talk about the world in some way. So this is, I think, how I bring something to our discussion, and to bring something, and then we come back.
I think you can use direct.
It's okay. I don't know, when you are speaking, I was thinking, we've grown up by learning that United Nations is an international organization, and we never think it's a global organization. I think there is a differentiation between being international and being global. When I received this invitation to speak in this panel, what caught me is this, your question of this global structure, global, and questioning about the gatekeeper's rule. The term gatekeeper is very problematic to me, so I just like to first ask, is this gatekeeper's job to let things in or to let things out, or both? And how about if you turn it, look from a different way, then the in is out? So this is a first response I've been thinking. People always talk about this proportion, if it's even, if it's justified, but we know this is just the departure point. Things are way more complex. I'm sitting here, feel very happy that Chinese tax, to import is only half of what happened in Brazil, but still, around 30%. It's a huge amount. It's way less competitive when you compare with Japan and South Korea. But at the meantime, when we have such a question by figures, by proportion, then we need immediate follow with even further, study, like, tax imports way much duty-free and lower than China, the country like Japan and Korea. How big is the art world? What's the impact they create? We all know that compare with mainland China, the history of collecting, public collection and private collection, collecting quote-unquote international art in Japan and Korea has way longer history, and I believe until today, still as, I'm not professional, but I think still could be stronger than mainland China market. That's why my colleagues from Europe and States, they're always on their way to Japan and Korea, drop by in Beijing. Just kidding. But true, I know that because long history, because the existence of public institutions and private museums there in Korea and Japan, it's considered quite, compared with China, more global, or what I call more international market. But just to add more facts to, thought for food, to think this idea of global versus regional or local, to contribute some facts that back then in the turn of millenniums, when the contemporary art market suddenly became present and booming in China, from beginning like 2000 and went to the peak 2006, 2007, and then slowed down 2008. Maybe people not necessarily understand that there were many Korean galleries in Beijing, in China, representing Chinese artists. Could be and Japanese. Could be a branch from quite established Japanese and Korean gallery, or could be emerging galleries whose career started in China. And that's something when we talk about global regional, we need to look at it more closely, the complexity of what I call this, like you describe Basel, feel like a global regional thing. And then when I think about, in comparison, my environment is more like a regional global. The other thing is the Chinese contemporary gallery system and art market actually has a huge contributions, not only from Taiwanese collectors, but Taiwanese dealers and galleries. Because this whole art market thing is pretty new in mainland China. Mainland China just opened up, to the world, quote unquote, 798, which is questionable, but that's how historian, economists, politician, media is looking in China. But the art market actually started in 80s with a lot of energy and idea and experience and knowledge and activities coming from our people from Taiwan. So ethnically speaking, we are all Chinese, but geographically, politically, it's divided. So now, then come to Hong Kong. Good luck, Hong Kong, Asian gallery 50%. How many percent you said in Miami is 16% from South America? Basel, Miami, 16%? Hong Kong is, I don't represent Basel. I don't represent Basel, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Hong Kong, Basel has proportioned evenly between Asian gallery 50% and then the rest of the world 50%. So these are the interesting facts I want to also add in here. Yeah.
And how about Art Basel itself? Do you feel like there would be more galleries in China, in mainland China, that are now already have a level of professionality that they could get access to Art Basel and that they want to get access to Art Basel?
I was, before I rushed to here, I was doing my own calculation, like how many clients we sold and new clients, how many are returned. I was having fun doing this calculation. So let me just try to ask a few more questions regarding this proportion calculation. I think this question of Basel presentation might need to follow with how many of these 4 dominating countries' galleries. I actually think all these galleries represent themselves. They don't represent the nation states, not like in Venice, right? They represent themselves. They represent their own idea, their own history, their approach. They represent roster of global international artists. So you might want to look at this, this dominating nations galleries proportion of Asian artists they represent, the South American artists they represent, then to get the question more complicated. But then again, I also think the third thing we need to respond to is, my own belief is Art Basel, as one of the hierarchy of art system now, is professionally, of course, is responding to the entire art world's ideology and structure. Therefore, if the important global institutions, museums, the proportion of artists showing there with the group show or solo show, is mostly from these 4 countries, then let's do an even more detailed calculation that the proportion here is reasonable or not, and how are we able to change, or we'll be very happy to keep it.
Yeah, if I may, can you show the slide that I asked you to? Because this is the next one. Sorry. This one. here. So it's a sentence from the newspaper which is probably linked to what you were saying, because apparently we are saying that Art Basel, prevalence of Western, Hong Kong, prevalence of Far East, Miami, a good proportion of South America. But then, if you look at the museum dynamic, of course, things are a little bit different, as has been noticed by the Art newspaper. And I took the pleasure to do a little exercise that I will show you very quickly, which is we found 34 international art museum, contemporary art museum. We looked at the exhibition in the last 10 years of those 34 museums, taking the most important in the different countries, not putting more proportion on the West, I mean, a little bit scattered around. And we looked at the artists that are growing in the Basel system, so the artists that are having more galleries in the time being here, and the artists that are rejected by the Art Basel system. So we compared the structure of exhibition and solo exhibition of the artists that are kept into the Basel system, and we compared this with the artists that are selected out, in and out. So maybe it's a joke, but the results I can show you very quickly is this. So this is the representation of the network in the museums of the artists that are more included in Basel. So the triangles are the exhibition. The squares are the galleries, okay? The galleries in light red are the galleries that more often are there when the artists are growing inside the Basel system. And this is the same picture for the artists that are, in a sense, selected out from the Basel system.
You have to, I think, you
So in a sense, I would say that you have a reflect of the Basel activity into the museum structure of activity, which is revealing what is underneath the sentence of the Art newspaper about the fact that is the symbolic, the cultural importance of Basel, which is even more than the market or connected to the market.
So what is shown in Art Basel is going kind of parallel with what is being shown in the museums. That's an important finding.
That's what
The data
appears
show.
that data show. Of course, the sample is 34 museums, so it's a very small sample. It's an initial finding, but it is struck me the fact that there is this kind of symmetricity.
Now, of course, it could still be the case that these are artists who are maybe shown by these galleries like Gagosian and David Turner, and we all know the names, but they might still come from all over the world, which is partially indeed the case. I mean, we also did the counting there, but also there we do find that it is more likely for an American gallery to represent an American artist. Of course, they don't represent only American artists, but the likelihood is bigger. It is more likely for a Berlin-based gallery to represent a German artist. Of course, they also have Asian, Latin American artists, but it's a smaller proportion. And like piling up these different findings, you do come up with a picture that is rather closed. It's a bit of a closed shop.
Olav, Stefano, and so the market is controlling the museums?
I'm not answering to this question because I don't know. What I saw is that you have a relation. Talking about the solo show, because the group show is a different logic, also different economics. But for the solo show, you see that there is a close relation. And if I would say, of course, here you're not acting like in Venice, in the Venice Biennale, but if you go around in the Venice Biennale and you see who is delivering their pieces to the Venice Biennale show, you see the name of those galleries.
By the way, if the audience has questions, wants to interrupt, wants to follow up, feel free. I think there is a mic already available to go around. There is a question here in the front. There's another question here in the front.
Thank you. I'm not from the art world, but a very interesting conversation. Do you have options of what it should be, or an example of a system where you can say, and in Tokyo that it works like that? I hear a lot of perhaps more positive to say it could be like that. You know, could we not focus on how it could be better, or where it is better, or where you think how it should be? Perhaps I'm not.
Let me say some positive thing. Maybe I'd like to share my experience with Basel, Hong Kong. You know, it was started as rather a regional fair, but having a global vision and ambition. And it's already very successful and played a very important role. And then when Basel took over, it has been immediately showing the effect of our passion and love the fairs nowadays, you know, apart from the things people criticize. But me come from a background not only as a gallerist, also as an educator, as somebody who's very interested in curatorial and the entire, you know, cultural development at large. So to me, it's a very important public space, public arena. It's playing extremely important role of education. But let me just put it this education, quote unquote. When we say education, it's more like, oh, we have, you know, such a knowledge and power and, you know, confident we go somewhere, you know, like a missionary. No, this education process is a multi way. It's like you go in there to share your knowledge, idea, but you're receiving from the others. It's a constant negotiation. So to go to Hong Kong, Basel, no matter your gallery is such an important one among these 5, you know, you need to send people there on the ground. You have your office, your outreach, you know, either through artists, or through your collector friends, and then you start to work with local museums, possible collaboration on either supporting the Biennale or artist residency or curatorial project. It's ongoing. The fair only go for 5-6 days, but the conversation, the dialogue is creating a totally new dimension. You know, if Basel do not have Hong Kong, then it's very different. But because the Hong Kong, I believe myself is watching that the Hong Kong experience is also shaping the Basel and Basel Miami. So I do believe it's very important things happening. And then let me go back to not necessarily responding to your question, but something I would like to add. You know, a country like China, I believe a country like India or Russia might be similar. Country like China, I always call that we have 3 mainstreams. Okay, we have the struggling, vibrant, you know, alternative, very energetic community of curator, critic, emerging space, and interesting practice, be a self-organized organization or individual artist. This emerging thing we all love to support. And that is a mainstream. It's actually very powerful. And then at the meantime, we have the so-called, quote-unquote, contemporary art world, which is strongly linked with the global. Like, I'm sure we got to go have a drink after this. Now we talk together. So this relationship is always, you know, share and collaborate and fight, you know, together globally in different geographical location. But then don't forget there's this official dominating culture, the negotiation between the modern and the tradition, it's not even complete. And there is not a thorough, proper public collection, display, writing, or ideological kind of clean, grand narrative to support it. It's already very complicated. And then plus, now there is new negotiation between the contemporary, the contemporary understanding of the official modern, which is become unstable, and then going back to tradition. So people, when you read our newspaper, when you read all these census, these figures, you go like either have such an imagination of China like the world number third, number fourth auction house by size, by revenue, by sales figure, as after Christie, Sotheby are the two Chinese giants. But then if you go more into detail, how many proportion is traditional art, how many proportion is modern, I think then you understand. So I think this complexity of the locality and this hunger and curiosity, anxiety of sharing this complexity inside out, outside in, this entire thing is happening in Hong Kong. And that also has the strong impact on the phenomenon of Shanghai, Beijing, Jakarta, see our friend here from Thailand, the private museum thing is booming. And you see the amount of international artists having solo shows coming. William Kentry is going to have the solo show at the UCCA. Olav is going to have 2 or 3 solo shows in Beijing. In the next coming years, you see all these things are going on. I believe, the fun of dealing with commodity, of dealing, is to get real and to get full, complete. Therefore, markets, I wouldn't say market or Basel or Art Fair control the museum. No, I don't think so. I think this commercial sharing, distribution, is what I call the visual economy. It has a strong impact on ideology, on curatorial, on art history, on writing, and on our cultural life beyond art. So here is my long answer, extremely positive.
Do you want to respond as well, Marcio, or
Hi.
shall we?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah, please. Can we get a mic here in the front?
I have a question at the back as well.
Oh, okay. The light, by the way, I can see none of you. We're completely blinded by the light.
No worries, I'll tell you.
We see shadows.
First of all, thanks for such an honest talk and addressing the elephant in the room. My name is Johanna Suleta, and I'm Colombian British. I live in the UK, and I was originally in business, but changed into the arts and culture, seeing the need to develop more of a presence about Latin American culture there, because 14 years ago, people didn't know much about it and only had a negative reference. Fortunately, 14 years forward, the scene is very different, but I think it's a work in conjunction, first of all, also by the government and equally by the art world. So currently, it's the year of Mexico in the UK, so you can see what the difference is at this time. Now, I organized a festival last year, interdisciplinary, and in the art talks, the question was why Latin American art has only become attractive now and not before. And we came to 4 main conclusions to follow what you were saying. First, because of the prevention with the dictatorships. Second, because of the high prices of tax importing art. Third, because Art Basel 13 years ago really opened the door to focus on the Latin American market, to focus on the region. And fourth, because the money flow after the financial crisis. It's also very happening in Latin America, hence more demand in the art. I wonder which other factors do you think apply to this? I think Art Basel is actually doing well for opening that door, which may be the major player in Latin America and Asia. And my question would be, yes, one, which other factors do you think play to develop this into a growth, also because from Africa we don't know much. In London, Saatchi Gallery, for an instance, it put a show last year called Pangea about Africa and Latin America to give more visibility, and this year they put Pangea 2 as well. So, and what it's the percentage, not percentage, but the representation in comparison with Latin America and Asia, because Asia is also coming with big steps, and also due to their money flow there as well.
Before we give...
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Before we give brief responses to that, I would like to take one other and unfortunately last question. Time is running out.
I am Maria Veronica, the representative of Ecuador in La Biennale de Venezia, living 15 years in Paris and now in Dubai. So I have been very, very, very observing all the things that you teach us to improve any of our main goals. I would like to be, for my question, based in this very interesting visual analysis and aesthetics about the main galleries, some lines named to the main museums, because it has so much sense. And I believe that there are, no matter who doesn't agree, has so much of truth. Just a curiosity, all the galleries, talking in symbolic terms, are monsters. So what say, after these two lines of capital names, which are theoretically the best galleries, the biggest and the most rich galleries, what about those that are in the fourth line, fifth, sixth, and go on? And it is, you feel, being very involved in the art market, international, a kind of a strong rivalry and terrible confrontation already for those other monsters that must not be very happy with this reality. How do you feel that is going to go some battle and to change, as you say, first the system? What do you feel between one type of galleries and others like Art de Paris or Chantal Cruzal or whoever that doesn't get that first place yet?
It would be a panel discussion on its own. I would like to ask you, all three of you, to give very brief responses, and then we are going to wrap up. Can we maybe start with Liu Jay?
Already forgot what was the question before. What was it?
Latin America.
Oh yes, I'm actually curious about that too. Maybe you speak of that first.
I totally agree, you know, because we're talking about specific things, but coming, for instance, to think about what happened when Basel began, Basel Miami, is something absurd what changed the city. I think is an example how really a city can be touched and can change from a big and important event. So when you look back to these 13 years, you see museums growing in Miami, you see collectors coming and to have and opening foundations, open, you know, free spaces to the public, began to be much more connected about scholarships, to exchange. So this is, I remember once, I think 2 years or 3 years ago, was the mayor of Basel and the mayor of Miami changes the keys of the cities, of course, symbolical way. So this is something that was really important, and how they are now, they are renovating the convention center, and how they push the hotels that grows a lot to pay also part of this renovation. So to have art inside of the hotel. So it's a totally a different approach, and was very important. And what is main also, this scene make people to go there. And just after, I think, for sure, how I think also improves the Art Bogota, or makes you have a São Paulo fair, and then began to be the Rio de Janeiro fair, and how the collectors also, that's a point, began to be much more international. And as I was talking before, began to be part of the boards of important museums. So what they did, when they come back, they began to be part of a board in the inside of the country. So they began to bring also the the knowledge, what they get outside, inside, and began to mix this globalization. So this is, I think, something positive coming, and that we needed to see how important it is changing. And one question also, I want to bring one point more about interesting thing is that the Basel Miami is the event that bring more value and more money to the city between all the other fairs in the convention center, more than boats. It's something really impressive. So.
I was just very interested in the question she raised, that apart from all those things we all know, what is making Latin America different? Because we in Asia, we believe we don't have the privilege of Latin America. We do think so, because we, the contemporary art organization, gallery, representing the contemporary practice, contemporary thought, these are global shared experience. I don't see it local or less pressure at all for what we do. We feel all equal and empowered. But when you think of representation, we become the mediator who's struggling, in between. Because back home, we are not understood, we are not supported fully, like our colleagues we are competing with here. We don't have that privilege. And at the meantime here, it's way more difficult for us to present our artists in museum shows, for sure. So we are trapped in between. And we believe the reason is historical and it's going to be long-term to change. It's a big effort because, there is this saying of, we got modern art from Russia, not from the West. There is this understanding of Latin America strongly share with the conceptual art history, with literature, theater, tradition, many things on the cultural domain. 100 years, modernity.
I'm afraid we have to close.
Yeah, that's
I get
my
important signals
we should share later
from the organizers that we have to close down. I want to thank the panelists very, very much for having this great conversation. I want to thank the audience. I'm afraid we didn't answer all your questions. I do hope that the next time we will all meet here, there will be even a higher share from regions outside of those big 4 countries, because I have been doing a lot of research there. They are extremely vibrant scenes, and I do believe that the art ecosystem and the Art Basel system has a lot to gain from more inclusion of those countries. So hope to see you again at the next talk.
Thank you.